And I realized that going vegan is the only way to be a compassionate person. In 2016, I became the first mountaineer to reach the top of Mount Everest on a vegan diet. It wasn't enough for me. This time around, I want to do it in the purest of ways. On Mount Everest, I used a suit of animal origin. There was no suit that could resist extreme temperatures created without killing animals. Majority of mountaineers use suits for which animals have been killed in the process of development. That wasn't okay for me. I felt guilty. That's why I started to search for someone who shared my values, someone who shared my dream, and that could help me realize it. Climb an 8,000-meter mountain in a 100% animal-free suit. I tried and tried, but I had no answers. Then I found someone. Someone who created a 100% animal-free climbing suit. In this suit, I climbed Mount Lhotse last year. It's the fourth highest peak of the world. Mountaineering, sure, is a passion of mine, but I cannot compromise on my ethics. I cannot compromise on my values. At the end of the day, veganism is not about just eating some food, but it's a philosophy of life. It's a value system, it's my ethics. And if I'm going to compromise with my ethics, then who am I? I'm going to be a mountaineer, but I'm going to do it as a vegan or not do it at all. Now I'm here in the Dolomites, getting ready to achieve the biggest dream of my life. I want to climb Mount Everest in a 100% animal-free suit. I'd always heard from a lot of mountaineers that paths are really rugged, steep, good technical climbing. But to me, mountains is a place where I just become one with myself. It may be Dolomites, it may be Mount Everest, or it may be the local mountains in Mumbai. It's just sheer joy to be in the mountains. For me, just the chance of being in the mountains is a big privilege, and that's what life is for me. I am ready to bring respect for nature, for animals on top of the world.
So, just a brief kind of visual sense into what the journey looks like, but want to kind of just quickly dive into just some of the background story of how I finally got into mountaineering. And I still remember this picture that I'm sharing with you folks on the screen. This is from May 19th, 2016. And I vividly remember every second of this moment. I vividly remember every emotion from this moment. It was minus 35 degrees Celsius. I was standing on the very top of Mount Everest for the very first time in my life, about 20 meters away from the very top. And I remember it was so cold. I was so tired, so miserable in some sense, almost bordering to suffering on the top. And it was so cold that as tears rolled down my eyes, they almost instantly froze on my eyes. Uh, and if someone would have told me back in 2008 or 2009 that I was going to leave my job as a director of India operations of some software company and go on a journey to climb the toughest and tallest mountains of the world, I would have clearly said, are you out of your mind or something? I mean, I was just a regular, happy go lucky guy living the next door and happy as a software engineer, no midlife crisis, no quarter life crisis, no crisis in my life. Actually, just enjoying my life as a techie. And so, kind of to give you a short background story of how I got into climbing Mount Everest or how this converted into a dream. Uh, at some point in October of 2010, I decided that I'm going to walk to the base camp of Mount Everest. And I landed in Kathmandu and I took this flight to a small village called Lukla. Lukla is also one of the most dangerous airports in the world. So after kind of taking this 25-minute flight and surviving the flight and landing alive on the airport, we kind of went through this 10 days walk through the Everest Valley, or also known as the Khumbu Valley. And what I truly, even till date, believe is some of the most majestic Himalayan scenery that I have ever seen in my entire life. We landed at Everest Base Camp, and I still remember I was excited almost like like a kid in a candy store, like wanting to see Everest up front, up close. And one of the biggest problems with Everest Base Camp is that it's almost like an anticlimax sort of a thing, because you reach the Everest Base Camp and
नाश्ता के
you
साथ
can't
खा
even
लो।
see Everest from Everest Base Camp. So kind of I reached Everest Base Camp, and then luckily our team had set up this small detour where we were camping at Pumori Base Camp. And this mountain that we see on this picture is Pumori Base Camp. And this is how a typical base camp looks like. We have our climbers tents, and we have a kitchen tent, we have a dining tent. And Pumori Base Camp offers some of the best views ever of Mount Everest. Right here in front is Mount Everest, a far better view than Everest Base Camp itself. So we were like really lucky to spend a couple of nights here. And I remember on the first evening, as we were all sitting in the dining tent and talking about the last few days that had gone by and chit chatting, taking pictures, and just generally enjoying our time. I remember one of the Sherpa guides shouting my name outside. And in the mountains, it's almost always never good if someone's shouting your name. So I quickly ran out, and the Sherpa said, "Sir, piche dekho." And as I turned around, I think I saw one of probably this is one of the most pivotal moments of 41 years of my existence, where I saw this sunset happening on Everest. Every other mountain was in the color of gray and blue. Everest, bang in middle, was burning golden in color, as if someone had lit the snow on fire. And for me, when I saw Everest this way, I promised myself that I am going to come one day and stand on the top of this mountain. Frankly speaking, standing at that time, looking at Everest, getting to the top of Everest, or taking a rocket and reaching the moon, both were impossible for me. But at least Everest was something that I could aspire. And so I decided, this is it. This is the dream of my life. This is the calling of my life. And then I came home. And I came home and I remembered some words from my expedition leader. And I also started researching about Everest. And this is what I found. Um, but before I get into that, I do want to share or take this step back and kind of share one of the biggest takeaways also from this entire last 10-year journey. When I found my Everest, finding my Everest, or sheer just having a dream to aspire towards or move towards, mere that action and kind of affirming to myself that I'm going to do this gave me the passion and drive to go on a journey to relentlessly pursue this kind of dream that I had. And I think if any, I don't know how this talk is going to go. If you like it, great. If you don't like it, still great. But I would ask each one of you that when you go back home, when you are kind of sitting and kind of just thinking about your life, please take some time out and think what your Everest in life is. For me, my Everest gave me the passion and drive to go on this journey, and I'm pretty sure it will also give you the same kind of passion and drive to go on and climb your personal Everest. And that's kind of I would, I think if that's one takeaway that you can get from this whole story that I'm going to share, I think that would be great. But as I said, that I went back home and I quickly realized that Everest is at 29,000 feet. If you have ever taken a flight across Mumbai to some other city, when the plane gets at the cruise altitude, which is about more than 30,000 feet, Everest is at literally that height. And we have to be climbing that to that height physically. And if that is not enough, I know of problems such as HACE and HAPE, high altitude cerebral edema and high altitude pulmonary edema. Cerebral edema is when there's too much swelling on your brain, and pulmonary edema is when there's a lot of swelling on your lungs. It's literally your fluid buildup in your lungs as if you're drowning in your own lungs. Or if that wasn't enough, people get frostbite where they lose their toes, they lose their fingers, and if they don't get amputated, then gangrene could happen and they could go into a septic shock, potentially even dying. There's hypothermia, where you feel like super cold. You feel so cold that you actually start feeling really hot, because there's lack of oxygen in your brain, and you are just, your body is simply very close to death. And eventually a lot of these situations finally leading to the death. And to someone like me who had zero background in terms of mountaineering whatsoever, like I'm a Gujarati, a software engineer. Back in 2009 and 10, I used to be 110 kilos. I come from a community where people would take an elevator to just climb one floor. Forget climbing even a hill. Everest is not even in their wildest dreams of their life. So it's kind of, so many things were stacked against me that this dream almost felt in some sense impossible. And uh, one thing, another big takeaway from my side is, I think when you find your Everest, you will also very quickly realize that it is very risky or impossible, or both risky and impossible. But from hindsight and from having gone on this journey, I can also say that, uh, do, take the first step, do it, get over that hesitation, set up that dream and go forward. Kind of take that first step, even if it seems super risky, super impossible. I mean, even though I've just borrowed this mindset or borrowed this quote from the internet, even the word impossible, if you break it down, kind of says I am possible. So I do think that once you find your Everest and once you are kind of on the journey to climb your Everest, it's going to seem very risky, very impossible.
First year now.
But the idea would then be also to kind of go with the mindset of I am possible. Uh, but I also remember some very crucial words from my expedition leader, Tim Rippel. Uh, Tim is a Canadian adventure agency operator. And for 25 plus years, Tim has been putting people on top of Mount Everest. And I remember kind of asking Tim, hey, Tim, what's the secret behind climbing Everest? I remember asking him this in October of 2010, just the same evening when I decided I'm going to climb Everest. And I remember Tim clearly saying these words: Kuntal, to climb to the top of the world, you need a top of the world mind and you need a top of the world body. And as someone who aspired to climb Everest, I quickly realized that I neither had the top of the world body or I neither had the top of the world mind. And so I definitely had to go on a journey where I could create the top of the world mind and top of the world body. And for the next 5 years, I did go on that journey. uh, I'm not going to go deep into my training or talk about how I physically trained or how I mentally trained or what my training exactly looked like, but I can tell you that a lot of it was mix of cardiovascular endurance training, a fair bit of strength training, a fair bit of mental fitness training. And to kind of give you a typical week of my training, especially when I'm in Mumbai, there would be at least 3 to 4 treks that I would do every week. Some of the treks during the weekdays would be very short ones. I remember taking a local train to Matheran, doing a short hike of 3 4 hours, coming back down and being back home by 1 o'clock in the afternoon and getting to work. And then during the weekends is when I did a lot more volume work, where I would do treks which were 8 hours, 10 hours, sometimes even 12 hours, sometimes lasting for 2 days, almost 24 hours or more than 24 hours. A lot of these hikes were even done without any food or water. A lot of hikes were even done in pitch darkness. A lot of these hikes were even done keeping in mind conditions such as I had tied my one of my hands behind my back. And a lot of these things I had to do because if things went wrong on top of Everest, imagine you are at 28,000 feet where there's just 30% oxygen at sea level, where your brain is not functioning at all in any sense. If you run out of water, if you run out of food, if you get lost, if you fall down and break a bone, if you haven't even simulated that condition at sea level, how are you going to cope up with any of that at 28,000 feet where life is mere everything about survival? So a lot of my 5 years worth of training was spent just enormous amounts of hours worth of hard work. And then, of course, yes, training is great. Physically becoming fitter is given. If you are thinking of climbing Everest or such a big goal or endeavor without preparing in terms of physical fitness, you are setting yourself up for big failure. Uh, but on the other hand, building skill, learning the skills is also as important. Like, for example, today, if you want to get a if you break your bone and if you have to go and get a surgery, you are not going to go to a doctor who's learning his surgery from Google. You are rather going to get your surgery done from one of the top orthopedic surgeons who actually knows what he is doing, who's actually had the training, has the background. So similarly in mountaineering, I thought it would be smarter to get some good training to build that good foundation so that I can become a reliable climber. Because when it comes to mountaineering at higher altitudes, you could easily end up dying, and I didn't want any of those conditions to kind of like my lack of skill, my lack of training kind of contribute to any of that. So I spent a lot of time just learning how to become a reliable and a very good mountaineer. And then the third and very crucial thing is, yes, I trained really, really hard. I built a lot of skill, but I also had to apply that in practical field purposes. So I went and I did lots of expeditions. Probably a couple of dozen of Himalayan expeditions is something that I have been part of. I climbed various 5,000-meter mountains, 5,500 meters, 6,000-meter mountains, 6,500, 7,000-meter mountains. I even ended up climbing an 8,000-meter mountain before finally saying, hey, now I'm ready to climb Everest. So kind of a very long journey of building skill, getting the physical fitness training, and then getting a lot of experience of climbing in snow, rock, ice, in different altitudes, in different conditions, in different countries, so that I could kind of build the best version of myself that could go and climb Everest in a very, very good fashion. So that's the kind of journey I went through. And again, one of my biggest takeaways from this entire journey is that there is absolutely no substitute to hard work. If you are on a journey like Everest, hard work is a given. You have to absolutely put in the time. There are simply no shortcuts to the top. And in my opinion, there are no shortcuts to any place worth going on this planet. So uh, that's something kind of, a very, very big takeaway. You find your Everest, you have to take the risk, but it is not like just, mindless, reckless risk. It is a calculated risk, and it is calculated risk backed by a lot of planning, lot of hard work, and a lot of preparation. Not just, like hey, I'm going to climb Everest. Today I'm 110 kilos. I'm just going to go climb it tomorrow. Not happening. Um, I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey. I tried climbing Everest a couple of times. The first time I climbed in April of 2014, and unfortunately, on April 18th, one of the single largest accidents on Everest happened, killing 17 Sherpa guides in an instant. Some of the top mountain climbers, kind of, in the world, and I still remember that it was really, really tough on all of us. For the next 7 days, there was a lot of back and forth in terms of whether we should climb, whether there's a safe route through the mountain. Unfortunately, our expedition was cancelled because there was no safe route that we were able to find through the mountain that season. And so at that in that year, we had to all turn around and come home. And from that year, one of my biggest takeaways has been, I think, just we have to stay positive, we have to stay focused. And when I say positive, I don't mean you have to be happy, you have to be smiling all the time. Happiness, smiling, and sadness, all of these are temporary emotions. They are up and they are down. Sometimes you are happy, sometimes you are sad, sometimes you are in a different, kind of mindset altogether. But being positive is just your overall attitude. You can be positive, yet you can be sad at the same time, or yet you can even be happy on the other hand. But you can still be positive that no matter what, everything's still going to be all right. So that's the kind of mindset I kept. I stayed focused, I trained harder. I also realized that there were certain kind of things that I had missed out in my training. And while we couldn't climb the mountain, I was also able to test myself a little bit on the mountain and realize that there are certain things that I can really work upon well and come back the next year. So I went and I worked upon those things, and I came back to climb Everest again in 2015. And in 2015, everything was going well. Now I'll explain how we climb Everest. Everest is climbed in multiple stages. You climb Everest in three stages. Stage one is where you walk to the base camp of the Everest, which takes about 10 days worth or so. Stage two is once you have reached the base camp, you also have to let your bodies acclimatize to the various altitudes on the mountain. Like you go to 20,000 feet, you go to 22,000 feet, you go to 25,000 feet. But after reaching those altitudes, you also have to come back down. And so this process is a lot of up and down, and it takes about almost 25 to 35 days. And then stage three is where once you have a good weather window on the mountain, where on the top there's potential to climb and reach the top, it takes about 10 days worth of time to finish the stage three, where you get to the top and come back down. So all combined three stages takes about almost 55 to 60 days to climb to the top of Everest. And this time around, we had finished stage one very easily because it's just walking to the base camp. And then we had even finished half of our stage two, and we were stationed at the base camp, because that's where you come to kind of rest and recover and recuperate and eat, more food. So we were all enjoying our time at the base camp. I remember it was a pretty decent day. A big fog had set in at the base camp, so it was a little warmer due to the fog, and pretty good weather. We were all enjoying our time, and then remember one of the largest earthquakes to hit Nepal in a century hit us. We were bang in middle of a 7.9 magnitude earthquake, and I still remember it almost felt as if we were standing on a giant swing which was swaying from one end to the next end. Uh, that earthquake also ended up inducing a massive avalanche. When that avalanche came to us, it was about less than 3 seconds away. And I still remember, from left of the sky to the right of the sky, the entire sky was filled with this avalanche. It was almost like a tsunami of snow and ice. And in that moment, I did not feel that I was going to die. I was actually 100% certain that I was going to die. So in that moment, I actually even said my prayers and everything. Okay, this is it. This is how I'm going to die. And so it is sheer luck that I miraculously escaped that whole event. But I still remember 50 feet away from us, there was a campsite where 5 people ended up dying. Mere 50 feet, kind of, between my life and death. And to this date, all I can have is that I'm lucky and just gratitude that I'm alive. Uh, Unfortunately, 21 people died at the base camp in a very, very gruesome fashion. More than 100 people injured. I still remember walking at the medical tent and seeing some of the injuries. Someone had broken their arms, someone had broken their legs, and it was almost like a complete war zone kind of a situation where everything was just devastated and people dead bodies were being brought in, and it was tough. And we made a phone call to Kathmandu and we quickly realized that 10,000 people had died, and more than 5 lakh people were homeless. And it was no longer a mountain climbing tragedy like it was in 2014. This time it was a humanitarian tragedy, one of unprecedented levels in some fashion. And in my mind and in my Sherpa leader's mind, I was a civilian team leader and my Sherpa was the big boss of the team. Both of us sat down and one thing was very clear in our mind. We don't want to climb this mountain. Doesn't make sense to climb this mountain. And the Sherpa team, the porters, the cooks, every single one of them need to be with their families in this time of need. And so we kind of canceled our expedition and turned around and came back home. And for me, it was like just one inconsequential year. I could always go back to climb Everest. Nothing kind of wrong with it. Um, just a second. So this is the avalanche. I hope you can see it.
Oh, oh. No. Fuck. 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 Come under my jacket. Come under my jacket. Are you okay? Yeah.
You alright?
Yeah.
So after I came back home, probably this is the first time in my life that I truly had some self doubts whether I'll be able to make it to the top, whether I will ever be able to get back to Everest. And uh, a lot of people also told me, Kuntal, you don't have what it takes to climb to the top of this mountain. Uh, it felt, I mean, even when I spoke to some of my family members, they were like, Kuntal, don't go back. So many people are dying on the mountain. It doesn't seem smart at all. But in my mind, this was my dream and this was my baby. And if I give up, it was going to be kind of my loss in some way. At the end of the day, there were always going to be challenges. There was going to be a lot of adversities, and I always knew about that. And I decided in my mind that I'm going to try one last time. I'm going to stay focused. I am going to stay positive, like I have been for the last so many years. And I am going to go back in 2016 and try this one last time. And so I came back in 2016, and I remember we went through stage one fine, stage two completely fine. This time around, we even got to stage three. We were almost at the very end of the expedition. We were stationed at Camp 4, which is 26,000 feet. 26,000 feet and above is also known as the death zone. Scientists have figured out that about 26,000 feet, human bodies cannot naturally acclimatize and cannot even survive very well with supplementary bottled oxygen. So you are literally on borrowed time when you are inside the death zone. So you really want to get inside the death zone, get to the top as quickly as you can, get down and get out of there. And we were stationed inside this. I remember 7:30 in the evening, Mingma Tenzi Sherpa, my Sherpa said, Kuntal, let's go. We have to now climb to the top. And so one by one, all the members started leaving. And in the end, me and Mingma were left. And Mingma said, I completely miscalculated and we no longer have any water. And I told Mingma that without water, we are not going to survive reaching the top. And so Mingma said, okay, give me some time. And Mingma started digging ice, started digging snow from there, started a burner, started kind of, boiling that and trying to make water out of it. It was so cold, it was so windy. We tried everything we could. It almost took us 25-30 minutes to just get half a liter of water going for both of us. We put that in like a warm sock, put that in the backpack, and we started walking. And for the next 12 hours, we walked through the night. And here you can see that there's a lot of people on this final part of Everest where you get to the top. And I sometimes jokingly say that traffic jams don't just happen in Mumbai. Traffic jams also happen on top of Everest, and there have been worse traffic jams that have happened on Everest, unfortunately. Fortunately, in my year, it was not so bad. There were only 50 people who were in front of me that I had to cross to get to the top. But again, we kind of crossed them, and I still remember. Uh, Look, these traffic jams and these situations are part and parcel kind of any climb like Everest. And these situations can always unexpectedly happen either on Everest or on any mountain, or for that matter, anytime in life. I think you have to kind of just again stay positive and just adapt to the situation well, and use it to your benefit, and kind of, keeping the overall goal in your mind, keep going towards it. So that's what we did. And I still remember finally crossing the Hillary Step, one of the most famous areas on the top of Everest, and getting closer and closer to the top. A lot of people ask me, Kuntal, what was going on in your mind when you saw the summit of Everest? And there were two very distinct emotions. Again, I remember very, very clearly when I was standing on the top, how I felt. Uh, First emotion of intense relief that thank God Everest is over. Thank God this is out of my life. Thank God this is done. I mean, it was such a relief in some sense. But I think once that emotion went over, it was an emotion of intense exhilaration, joy, and just knowing that I have achieved one of the biggest dreams of my life. And I knew that I was strong enough to get back down as well, because getting to the top is only 50%. Getting back down is also super hard. And that's when an expedition truly gets over. So I knew at the back of my mind, I will kind of get down nice and easy. Uh, and it, I spent about 20 minutes on the top, and I have to tell you, these were the most magical 20 minutes of my entire life. I mean, the view from the top is spectacular, but I can say so many things. It will not resonate with you until you probably reach the top of your own personal Everest. And then you will probably get a sense of what I'm saying. Um, but this slide, if you see, says, did I accomplish my dream? And you may be asking, hey, Kuntal, you reached the top of Everest. So what's the problem? Well, problem is I was wearing this suit, and if you see the suit is made from feathers of slaughtered geese. Geese or ducks, these are amazing animals. Unfortunately, to create this jacket, a lot of them are slaughtered and their feathers are taken away. And in many extreme cases, they are not even slaughtered, just live geese. They pluck the feathers. There's enormous amount of pain involved. The geese gets infection and then eventually has a very, very painful death that happens to them. So a lot of times when we wear these feather jackets, or we have these feather pillows at home, or where we have a lot of these things which are made from feather, please remember that an animal has undergone tremendous amount of suffering for that piece to kind of get built. And as a vegan, I went vegan in 2002 for the cause of animal rights. I have been a vegan for the past 19 years. And I had promised myself one thing at the start of my Everest journey, that I am going to climb Everest as a vegan, or I'm not going to climb it at all. Unfortunately, when I stood on top of Everest in 2016, I was wearing this piece of jacket, which was made from the feathers of a slaughtered geese. For 4 years, every single year, I wrote to some of the biggest gear companies in the world, asking them to create an animal free version of this suit for me. This suit is one of the most critical piece of gear that is used on Everest. It saves a human being in minus 50 degrees Celsius of temperatures and high winds. I don't know of anyone who has climbed Everest or for that any other big 8,000-meter mountain without using these suits. So it was very difficult. All the companies were saying, no, it is not possible. Some of the biggest gear companies in the world, which had all the technology, and they were saying, no, this is not possible. Um, so finally, I ended up going and climbing this mountain while wearing a suit made from animals. But that guilt conscious that always stayed in my mind after I came back down, to a point that I started realizing, or I actually told myself that climbing Everest in 2016 was probably one of the biggest failures of my life in some sense. And I had to undo that failure. I had to work on rectifying the mistake that I had made. And so I kept writing. I did not give up. I kept writing to many, many gear companies in the world. And some point in 2017, a company called Save the Duck, it's an Italian gear manufacturer, they got back to me saying, Kuntal, we will manufacture a suit for you. And I remember after almost uh, 8 months of research and development and doing a lot of design work and going back and forth over what design would be the best on Everest and such big mountains, we finally created the first synthetic suit of the world. And wearing this suit, I summited Mount Lhotse, which is the fourth highest mountain in the world. Uh, and believe me, I was warm, I was cozy, I was completely safe when I got to the top of Lhotse. And that also gets me to my next takeaway, which is that failure is not bad, that it would be smarter to learn from your failure, innovate, and keep going forward. And that's the only way to success, in my opinion, at least. uh, yes, I failed. A lot of people would say climbing to the top of Everest in 2016 was a great success. In my mind, it was not. So it is important to recognize where failure happens. I recognize that a failure happened. I did something about that failure. I found out a suit. I wore that suit. I tested it on myself. This suit, the material of the suit was not even tested in minus 10 degrees Celsius. I was literally the first human being to ever wear this suit, risk my life, go to 28,000 feet, test it in that level of cold, that lower level of oxygen. I did whatever I could. The team innovated, they built a world class product. Eventually I had the suit ready, and eventually I decided that it was time to go and climb Mount Everest again. And this time I chose the Chinese side. And the single most reason why I chose the Chinese side is because it was colder, it was windier, and it was harsher climb. And in my mindset, I only had one thing to prove this time, that I can climb without wearing animals and that it is very, very possible to do it. And so I thought, if I climb animal without an animal suit in some of the harshest conditions on the planet, then I will prove beyond doubt that it is very possible. Especially if a Gujarati guy who has no genetic gift of bearing cold, who lives in Mumbai, which is almost 40 degrees Celsius throughout the year, if someone like me can wear this jacket without any animals, without any harming any animals, and can get to the top of Everest in minus 40 degrees Celsius, I am pretty sure this jacket can be used by every single human being across the planet. And that is the only thing I had to prove in this climb. Uh, we landed up in Tibet. I remember this time around there was no driving, or there was no walking to the base camp. There was instead driving to the base camp, because China has created like a highway to the base camp. It's literally like a 150 km per hour you can drive on that highway. It's like that level of concrete road that they have created to the Everest. So this time we drove. It took us about 4 or 5 days to get to the base camp, and post that. Uh, We spent stage 1, stage 2, acclimatizing, stage 3, reaching the final camp on the mountain. On the northern side of the mountain, the last camp, which is camp 3, is at 27,000 feet. It is also one of the highest campsites on planet Earth. I remember me and Mingma, again the Sherpa who I've always climbed with, both of us starting at around 9:30 in the night, walking for the first 5 hours through pitch darkness. This time around, it was so pitch dark that even if my hand was right in front of my face, I could not even see my hand. There was nothing. If even with open eyes, you would just think you are blind and it is all dark until you actually turn on your headlamp, and then you can see, what is in front of you. There's some rock or there's some snow, and that's what you're following and walking through the night. The Chinese side is notorious for many, many dead bodies that you see on the route. I remember seeing my first dead body. The guy's face was completely turned around and his back was completely broken. His hands were completely broken. It was a very, very difficult scene. And I kind of, stopped my Sherpa Mingma and I told him, Mingma, let's focus hard for the next 5 hours until we reach to the top. Any mistake and my dead body will also be here forever and ever. I don't want that to happen. So both Mingma and I, we just put our head down, put in full on focus, one step after another, one step after another. And at 5:30 in the morning, I was standing on the very top of Mount Everest for the second time. And this time I proudly removed my vegan flag, knowing that no animals had to suffer or die or exploited or abused for my dreams to come true. And truly speaking, in some sense, I finally achieved the biggest dream of my life. 2016 was a step in the journey towards the success eventually. And that also kind of brings to a very, very, very important takeaway from my life is that never give up. Never ever give up. If I had come back from the 2016 expedition and said, नहीं यार मैं फर्स्ट रूट नहीं बना सकता हूँ, नहीं यार ये नहीं हो सकता है, नहीं यार ये इम्पॉसिबल, यार जाने दो यार, छोड़ दो. If I would have said that, then that is what would have happened. I did not give up. I tried and I tried and I tried. And at one point, I kind of, got lucky. We were able to move forward, build the suit. But in some sense, I was even ready that if no company was willing to build a suit for me, then I was actually willing to build a suit on my own. I was willing to go to a tailor in Kathmandu who knew how to design a suit, and I would have worked with him to build a suit on my own. So I was committed to going that far in my journey. And that is something that I will share with everyone, that please do not give up in any journey that you kind of go on in life, especially a journey like Everest, which is your own personal Everest, which will be very risky, very impossible, filled with challenges, filled with failures. In spite of all of that, stay focused and don't give up. I think that will be probably a recipe for getting to the top. But I do have to take this opportune, kind of moment and take a step back and introduce all of you folks to some of the people who have impacted my journey in a very critical way. And I want to express my sincere most gratitude to these people. In 2015 earthquake, while we miraculously escaped death, I did not talk about a very specific incident where when the avalanche hit us, this is the guy who saved my life. His name is Jost Kabush. He's a German mountaineer. It was his presence of mind that saved my life. And it would be an understatement to say that, he literally gave me a second life that day. And in some sense, I'll always be indebted to him for the rest of my life for having that presence of mind. Because when an avalanche happens, human beings or even climbers are only thinking about themselves. They are not thinking about saving anyone else. The first instinct is always to save yourself. But this guy also had a presence of mind to save my life. So I will always be, in gratitude of him. Um, this is my mother and this is my wife, two of the strongest women I know, without whose love, without whose support, I would have never made it to the top of Everest. And in some sense, I will give you some background. My father, unfortunately, was diagnosed with Lewy body dementia, a form of dementia in 2001. And some point later in 2000s, he even lost his independence, which meant that he was completely bedridden. And my mother and I and my wife were his primary caregivers. So for my wife and my was a arranged marriage, and so for her to kind of sacrifice the prime 10 years of her life for my dream, I think they had a much harder, much tougher journey than I did. My wife treated my father like her own father. She put him on a diaper, she bathed him, gave him food, did everything, cleaned him, did everything she could, and again, just so that I could be in the mountains training and climbing my own dream. So again, I'm not going to express gratitude or anything. It's just that uh, I don't want to insult their contribution. It's just that it would be a understatement to say that I climbed Everest on shoulders of my mother and shoulders of my wife. They climbed a much bigger Everest than I did. I can't even fathom that I will ever be able to repay this back ever in my life. Um, and then finally, last but surely not the least, this is my Sherpa, Mingma Tenji Sherpa. I think, I am really appreciative of Bombay Management Association for inviting me and having me over and letting me share my story. Uh, and a lot of people, when they come to my talk, they reach out to me, hey, Kuntal, you inspired me. Hey, Kuntal, you are a star of the show. And I'm like, look, for me, the real stars, the real heroes, the real heart and soul of the Himalayan climbing are these Sherpa people. Without the help and support of Sherpa people, 99.99% of climbers on this planet would never make it to the top of Mount Everest. Ever. Just simply, period. They do everything from creating the base camp to opening the route to every single camp on the mountain, to the top on the mountain, setting up every camp, putting foods on all the camps, putting oxygen on all the camps, walking with us to the very top of the mountain. They do every single thing. And for me, Mingma also is my family away from home. For last 6 years, we have been climbing mountains together. He's my climbing partner. He's my mentor. He's my guide. A lot of times people ask me, why do I climb mountains? Yes, I climb mountains because I truly love mountains and I truly enjoy being in them. In some sense, I am one with myself when I am in the mountains. But it is also for these moments of camaraderie and brotherhood that I share with people like Mingma, that I truly value, that I truly am inspired from. That is why I come and I climb mountains. But again, these are some of the most amazing people. And without thanking these people or without giving credit to these people, it simply, it would not be correct. Uh, but that also brings me to my kind of final point, which is this was my team. And I truly believe that when we are on a journey like Everest, we must surround ourselves with a team that is positive, that is talented, that is smart, that knows what they are doing, that are going to be supportive of our dreams, and that are not just going to be yes man kind of people. Oh, should I do this? Yes. Oh, should I do this? Yes. No, they are also going to bring in a lot of constructive criticism, and they are also going to bring in a different perspective in the journey. And people who you can depend on when things go really wrong. I think that is the kind of team you should always bank on, and I have been very lucky to have had that team in my journey. And so, just like a short recap of what I've discussed until now, I think it all begins with finding your Everest. For me, it definitely began with finding my Everest, taking that first step, getting over that hesitation. Everyone has that hesitation, karu na karu, and then backing that up. Right? It's risky, it's impossible, but you have to back it up with planning, preparation, training. You have to understand there are no shortcuts to the top, and then always have that positive mindset. And there's going to be ton of obstacles and challenges in any Everest that you're going to climb in life. And overcoming these obstacles is going to define your character, or kind of maybe not define, but build your character in some sense. And that we also have to be agile and adapt and pivot. In 2020, who knew that world is going to be hit by a pandemic and we are all going to be doing Zoom calls every day, and we are all going to be working from home, and we are just going to be leading a very different life. But we all adapted. We all took a different direction. Overarching goal for everyone still remains the same, but we just are doing it slightly differently. And I think it's important to also learn from our failures. A lot of times I see people repeating, the same mistakes. I think if you make a mistake, nothing wrong with it, but at least put the effort of learning from the mistake, recognizing first that it is a mistake, learning from the mistake, and then not repeating it again, doing something else, right? Because making a mistake is what made you fail. So maybe now, do something different. And finally, I think never giving up and really, really using teamwork for success. So that's kind of, my mindset always. But I think a lot of times people also ask me, what next? You have already found your Everest. Uh, you have already climbed the Everest. What's left to do in life? Well, I'm like, find a newer Everest. There's always many, many, many physical and metaphorical Everests to be climbed in life. Just find the next one. It may take a while. You may not even find one for a while. It took me a while to find my next Everest. And just repeat exactly the same entire journey that I just previously shared. Uh, and in my mind, I think this is the crux. This slide specifically. When I stood on top of Everest in 2016, yes, they were the most magical 20 minutes of my life. Don't get me wrong, they were the best 20 minutes of my life. But not a single transformation happened me while I was sitting on the top. Heck, I was so miserable, suffering, tired that I couldn't even think, clearly. So no, not a single change happened in me. Every single transformation, every single change happened in me in the last 10 years. It's through this journey is where I went from being a 110 kilo unhealthy, obese software engineer to the guy who created at the top of the world mind and body to go and climb Everest. So one thing that I kind of, would also like each one of you to do is please take a step back and also enjoy the journey. Also fall in love with the process. If you are not going to fall in love with the process, sometimes you may not even reach the top. And then your entire journey will feel like just one difficult, depressing, sad journey. So fall in love with the process. Climbing Everest or not, I think will not matter at the end of the day. And for me, I think going on these journeys is super important, because when I go outside the comfort zone, when I go on these journeys, when I am faced with these obstacles and failures and all of these difficult situations, that is where I convert myself from what I am today to the next version of myself. At the end of the day, the aspiration is to be the best version of myself, and probably at the end of the day also to become a better human being. And today, that is what the biggest Everest of my life is. Not climbing a certain mountain, or not going and doing bodybuilding, or not going and creating a certain startup, but just becoming the best version of myself and becoming a better human being is the biggest Everest of my life. And this is why I go on a lot of these journeys. So this is kind of where I will end my talk with. uh, I am around on a lot of social media, very active on Instagram. You can feel free to reach out to me on any of these mediums. I'll be more than happy to respond to your questions, or you can just follow my journey. I post pictures and I talk about my journey, I talk about my training, about the food I eat and all of those things. But yeah, I am now around to take on questions and any comments that you folks may have.
Thank you, Kuntal. This is absolutely fantastic. One, I would say people with great passion can make the impossible happen, and I can see that in your journey. Before we take questions, I would like to request any comments. Like I see Indrapal ji, Shri Indrapal ji online. Would you just take a few minutes and
Yeah. I think very rarely one would have seen such an engaging and profound and sense-making, unusual presentation. I think this is the last years I would have watched at least 150 odd presentations, but this really stands out in number of ways, and I'm sure that would be the experience or the view of many others who have seen it. So Kuntal, this is a fantastic thing, and I think all adversities of being a vegetarian and living in Mumbai at 40 degrees centigrade temperature to -50, surviving the avalanche, etc. And your transformation, I think, is extremely inspiring, not only as individuals, but to the organizations. If they have to climb their own Everest, then perhaps your story could really help them a great deal. So thank you very much here for sharing your wonderful life journey with BMA. I have one question, if Prashant, you allow me to ask.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah.
In vegan, I believe protein is a big issue if you go for vegan diet. So with the kind of fitness regime that you follow and the kind of adventures that you take on, how do you make up for the protein that you get from non-vegetarian food?
Right. So in terms of protein, a lot of research has now happened in the last 10 years where the recent literature is saying that you can eat protein from either animal sources or you can eat protein from plant sources. And as long as you are eating enough, which means in terms of athletic scenarios, I would say about 2 grams per kg of body weight. So for example, let's say I am about 80 kgs. And if I am, as long as I'm eating about 160 grams or 170 grams of protein on a daily basis, in combination with my workouts and in combination with my kind of everyday lifestyle, as long as I'm hitting that, it could be from anything. It could be from dals, it could be from tofu, it could be from protein powders, it could be from, there are various vegan meats available these days in the market. There's even wheat gluten, which is, when you remove the starch portion of the wheat, then the protein portion of the wheat remains. So there's various sources of protein even in the vegetarian world or the vegan world. Of course, vegetarian world has more with paneer and those kind of things. But even in the vegan world, as long as you're eating enough, like there are seeds, there are nuts, there are whole lot of dals, everything from rajma to chole to tur and all the dals and everything from the soya based products and a lot of vegan meats that are available in the market today. While those are all processed food and I would eat them occasionally, but as long as you are eating enough in the day, the major mistake that most people make is plants naturally are very low in calories, which means that even if you eat them in a larger proportion, you may feel easily full and may then consequently be eating lesser than you would have in an omnivorous diet. So as long as you're eating enough protein, hitting that 150, 160 grams, at least in my context, being very smart and methodical about it, which is what I am. As an athlete, you should be planning your diet irrespective of whether it's an omnivorous or a vegan diet or a vegetarian diet. And so I plan it well. I include diverse range of protein sources and of course other my macronutrients and micronutrients as well. I am a nutrition coach myself, so I also understand how this world works, what all is going on in this world, and as long as I'm hitting that, I get pretty good performance benefits. And to give you a sense, in the last 10 years of my journey, veganism in terms of the diet itself, अगर मैं 100 प्रॉब्लम का भी लिस्ट बनाऊं ना, मैं जो मैंने लास्ट 10 साल में फेस किए, vegan diet would not even be the 101st problem on that list. So it is that non issue in some sense. As long as you are being very thorough about it, you're planning and you are researching and you're preparing well, you are taking the foods that are required and you are eating enough. Most people, they just say, mera performance bahut down ho gaya, I couldn't, cope up and everything, just because you're not eating the right foods. So I think it is important to plan and execute correctly, and then you should be fine.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Indrapalji. Now, may I request Ernest Fernandez, sir, to say a few words?
Sure.
Yeah, thank you.
Kuntal, what I really appreciated was your talking about your family, where you said your wife looked after your father. So she was climbing her Everest while
Right.
you were climbing your Everest. And I think in today's pandemic, every doctor who gets into that suit and goes into a hospital every day is climbing his Everest.
Yep.
And there are so many of us today we may not be, hardly any of us is going to climb Everest the way you have, but we have got to climb our Everest. And we've got to use those principles which you enunciated so well. So thank you very much. This was a very timely talk in the time of this pandemic.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Now I'm going to open it up to all the participants to please raise your hands or, just unmute and come online so that we can have questions. Sorry, who's this? Vigyanji? Yeah.
Hanji. Hi. Good evening.
Please do.
What a wonderful talk, and I love your presentation also.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I just had one question. Amongst all the top class mountaineers in the world we've seen so far, like Ken Singh, Sir Edmund Hillary, Will Gadd, Neeraj, we call them names also. Who do you think, who's been your role model and why?
So my role model is an American mountaineer. His name is Ed Viesturs. Ed Viesturs is currently the only American mountaineer to have climbed all the 14 8,000 meter mountains without the use of supplementary oxygen. And one of the big reasons why I love Ed Viesturs or love his mentality or attitude and approach to mountain climbing is around his concept of no shortcuts to the top, where he talks about how he trained, what kind of regime he went through, what kind of life he lived through before he finally got onto the mountains and achieved a feat which is very, very rare. And just his concept of risk, where he is super risk averse all the time, kind of with the mindset that live to fight another day. Mountains are always going to be there. If we stay alive, we'll climb mountains till we are 80, till we are 90. So a lot of these mindsets that I have taken from Ed's life, and in some sense, anytime I feel myself kind of, a little in dilemma around how to live life or how to make decisions around my mountaineering. Today, the world is very different. It's an Instagram world. It's a social media world, and there are things that are happening very differently. So I always fall back on his book. I always look back on his book, and the cover always inspires me. No shortcuts to the top, and that's all I always remind myself. There's so many people out there in the gyms using steroids, using performance enhancing drugs, creating bodies, unachievable physiques, unachievable fitness in very, very short durations, but then kind of getting hit by health problems, longevity problems, quality of life problems. And so I always look at this book and I'm like, no, that magic pill that I am after, that magic pill is consistency, discipline, and hard work. Not for few weeks, not for few months, not for few years, but for decades. That is the mindset I am in with, and that is the mindset that I have taken from Ed. His work over decades is what has made him the top mountaineer. And I am in this game not for few years, I'm in this game for decades. And that is what my mindset is.
Wonderful. And you said the book's name is No Shortcut for the Top, right?
No shortcuts to the top.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vigyanji. Anybody else? Okay, I see Indranil Ghoshji raised his hand. Yeah.
See,
So please go ahead.
basically, I would like to ask Kuntal a small question.
Sure.
See, I don't have mountaineering experience, very frankly speaking, but I have trekking experience.
Right.
And there is one department in Tata Steel, which is called Tata Adventures Club, or it became a department later of Tata
Right.
Steel, where Bachendri Pal is heading that department. I do not know still she is in charge of that department or not. So once I had opportunity to go up to the top, which is much lesser than what you have climbed. It is that name of the top is Bakharia Top, which is in Uttarakhand.
Yes.
I do not know. You might have visited that place.
Yes.
For me, it was really a struggling day. And Bachendri Pal was our trainer, and she was inspiring always. So she used to say one thing: that to me that Ghosh Babu, don't be afraid. What you are doing, it is present, and what we have done yesterday, it was your past. So don't look at the past. Don't look at the future also, only concentrate on the present. And that was the inspiration which I got. And do you have any similar thing in this, or what? How do you say what Vaichendra Pal had said?
For me, I have felt that over and over and over again in the mountains, because when you are climbing a mountain, you are existing in that microsecond of the moment. You are not thinking about the past. क्या mistakes हुआ, क्या किया, क्या गलत किया, क्या अच्छा करना चाहिए. You're not thinking about future at all, not planning for the future at all. You are existing in that microsecond of the moment, one step after another, one step after another. The only future you have seen is that next step. That's it. When I look at the summit, I never look at the summit. I am like next step, next step, next anchor, next tent, next camp. Slow. अगर मैं सोचूंगा ना यार, I want to reach the summit tomorrow, then I'll be so overwhelmed that I will never be able to achieve the summit. So breaking down the problem into much smaller pieces that can easily be done without getting overwhelmed, and then you are just going one step after another, one step after another. 2 घंटा करोगे, उसके बाद पीछे देखोगे ना, you will realize, man, I've come so far. And then you do that for another few hours, and then you look behind and you are like, now I'm suddenly standing on the top. So that's kind of my mentality always on the mountain. That be in that microsecond of the moment. And for me, that is also in some sense my meditation. A lot of people ask me, do I meditate? Am I spiritual? And those kind of things. For me, when I'm in the mountains, I meditate. When I am in the mountains, that's my spirituality. So that's what life is for me.
Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Thank you.
It is really inspiring.
Kavita, yeah, Kavita, you had
I have a simple question.
Yes.
Yes.
The very small step for becoming a complete vegan. Do you have enough assistance, help, and the chefs available who can not only cook for you, but you can also teach you how to cook?
You mean locally here in Mumbai?
Yes.
Yes. So locally here in Mumbai, there are few organizations that actually do give vegan training and that kind of teach you how to become a vegan chef or something. But frankly speaking, if you are eating vegetarian food, if you just remove ghee, butter, doodh, and those kind of dairy products, you are already eating vegan food. The vegan food is not drastically different from vegetarian food as such. Most people will just replace the ghee or butter with oil, and that's pretty much about it. And you have almost veganized your entire diet if you are living in a vegetarian household. But there are vegan chefs available that will teach you very specific vegan recipes and oil-free cooking, and cooking where they'll teach you how to make vegan cheese and vegan paneer and vegan ghee and vegan butter and vegan milk and everything, vegan dahi, whatever you want to make, they will help you veganize all of those things. Very much out there. You can connect with me offline and I can point you out to a certain of them.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Kavita?
Yeah.
You want to go for next question?
Yes, Kuntal, thank you so much for this inspiring story. And if you don't mind, we would again like to see the golden Mount Everest in your slides that you had shown, which is a spectacular view. And I remember in 2007, I had gone to Mount Kailash, and at 4:30 in the morning, the Mount Kailash was also looking the same, which you reminded me. And it's so nice to see all these slides of yours. And though difficult, but then the determination that you have shown and the pictures of that are really very inspiring. And what I liked about your presentation is you said your own Mount Everest, you find your own Everest. It doesn't mean that it is 28,000 feet above the sea. It's any small thing that I wish to climb and I wish to accomplish in life, career, and so on and so forth. how beautifully you have connected Everest to any small, simple goal that I wish to have, and the determination and the hard work and very focused approach that you have shown, and doing it times, 3 times with a very different perspective. I think that is really very motivating. Ethics and values that you've spoken about, veganism or not harming animals. I think it's a great virtue that you are exhibiting. I'm so happy to listen to you again, because I have listened to you in the past also, and you are again same inspirational speaker that I have ever come across. And thank you for accepting our invitation to motivate us at BMA also. And what is your next Everest?
What is my next Everest? Well, in terms of physical fitness endeavors, the next Everest is recently in the last 1 year, I have gotten very serious about bodybuilding, and that is something I even in my introduction it was mentioned. And when I said natural bodybuilding, I mean bodybuilding which is done without the help of performance enhancing drugs or steroids. The bodybuilding world is filled with people using steroids and performance enhancers. I don't want to use them, and without that, I want to compete in a bodybuilding competition, which is 360 degrees opposite of mountaineering. And so there has been not a single bodybuilder in the world who has ever climbed a mountain, and there's consequently even the opposite is not true. But I want to try and do something that no human has ever done, which is compete in a bodybuilding competition, get down from the stage, and then go and complete a mountain like Everest or something that I have, as far as my research goes, no human has ever done that. So I would like to do that. I know that it is an impossible journey, the next impossible journey that I'm starting on. And what I'm doing right now since last 1 year, and probably for the next many years, I'll be doing is I'll be laying the foundation for this journey. And hopefully trying it out in the coming few years. While the introduction read next 2 years and 7 summits, I have actually now changed my goal again. 7 summits, I have already done 4 of them, and the balance 3 are very straightforward, and I will easily do it. I know that. So I can't be, chasing a dream which is not like Everest. So it has to be a dream which is either Everest like or harder than Everest. So this is my next dream, is combining the two impossible worlds and trying it out. We'll see how it goes. If it works, great. Otherwise, there are many more Everest to be climbed in life.
Yeah, I have two more comments to make. Number one, is there any plan of taking people with you to the Everest expedition? And second thing is, what is the age range that you will recommend for this expedition?
At the moment, I don't have any plans of taking any people to Everest. Maybe not, at least in the next few months. Maybe in 2023 or 2024, I will see. And in terms of age range, other than I think anywhere between 16 years to 80 years, you can climb Everest. I have had the privilege of climbing alongside Japanese climber whose name is Matsumoto Tatsuo. Matsumoto was 79 when he climbed Lhotse with me. And Matsumoto demonstrated to me that age is just a number, while it is just, a very cliched statement that is made online all the time. And I don't want to repeat that. But Matsumoto also showed that if you are willing to put in the time, take care of your health, you can climb mountains even when you are 79. He started climbing at the age of 71. So there is there's no such age, oh, that I can't do this. I think any age, once you decide that you are ready and you are ready to commit, I think everything is possible.
Thank you. Thank you. That's so inspirational. Many of us can think.
Kavitaji, if you are allowed.
Yes, sir, please.
Yeah, I want to ask if Prashanti is also there
Yes,
amongst
sir.
us. Prashanti, you gave us also fabulous presentation on yoga, and you had told us, shared with us the philosophy of yoga and how it helps you scale greater heights. So do you see any parallels between this approach and the and the yoga way, or they're different? Any comments on that?
Thank you for asking that. I was waiting for my chance to speak.
Mhm.
So I was going to say that Kuntal, you actually brought out a very good point about your state of mind meditating when you're climbing. Absolutely. So I'm just going to quickly share a very short story. I was once in visiting Pondicherry. There is the meditation center, Matri Mandir. So we were visiting that place, and the guide who was taking us along, all of us, like bunch of us, we were visiting as friends. And one of our friends asked the French guy. He was a French guy who said he was, staying in Pondicherry for about a year, and he was at the meditation center every day serving. So, assuming that we all assuming things, right? So assuming that, whoever goes there is only sitting and meditating, right? So one of my friends, she asked him a question. So how many hours do you meditate? So he said, all the time. I'm meditating all the time. So I'm even meditating right now. So for him, meditation means not closing your eyes and sitting somewhere quietly, but meditating is to be right now in that moment and not wandering away, right? So, which
Yeah.
is a very, very profound for me, very profound insight, very simple, very profound. And that's something that we don't do when we are in our daily life. We're just like multitasking. Proudly, we say I'm multitasking, but that's not, how the way of life should be. The way of life should be like being still. Now, when Kuntal was sharing about it, I absolutely can relate to what he meant by state of mind being still. He's probably is so still that he's not worrying about Mumbai. He's not worrying about, his parents, his wife, or his family, or anything else about the job or what will happen. Let me tell you, Kuntal did not mention something. I have a friend who's a mountaineer as well, so I know this a little bit. That every expedition that he takes costs him a lot of money. So when he said he returned from one of that earthquakes, I'm sure that money has not returned back. When I say a lot, it is not something that you can even imagine. It goes up to 50 lakhs per expedition, especially when they're planning from the time when they leave their house and go up and come back. That's the kind of amount each expedition costs them. So when an expedition is not done and when they're coming back, which means that that money is actually like completely spent, irrespective of they've done it or not. So if he's spending, like, as I said, it is absolute dedication. My takeaway today is this picture that Kavita actually pointed out. Thank you, Kavita. Favorite picture right now from this session. And the one that you said, like, find your Everest and don't give up. Those are the two things that I'm taking away. But if there's any other questions, I would invite people to, unmute and ask. If not, I think we are ready for an vote of thanks.
Kuntal, how do we keep in touch with you?
Yeah, through Instagram or through WhatsApp. Let me see if I can share the slide. But yeah, let me just, type it here.
You gave it earlier.
My Instagram is this, and this is my phone number.
All right, so we have one more question, Kuntal. Somebody is asking, Harish Binde is asking, are you planning to write a book?
Am I planning to write a book? Sometimes I feel writing a book is much harder than climbing the Everest itself. And and a lot of my friends always write to me saying that you write elaborate posts on social media and you are such a good writer. You should be the one who should be able to easily write a book with so many stories and 10-year journey. I am going to be very honest. And you guys may think I'm being modest, but I'm not being modest. I'm just being honest here. I don't think I have done enough to warrant writing a book. And I'm very clear in my mind in that sense. So I know that, and I don't know when I will, get a sense that I've done enough. I don't know. Maybe when it naturally comes that I need to write a book, maybe there's enough value to add to someone's life and enough learnings to share, enough experiences to share, probably I will write a book. But I just don't see myself writing a book right now. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But otherwise, I think you're already sharing your journey through all these talks and inspiring so many people. I think book probably might have not done the justice as you're doing it right now by sharing your story with so many people and so many talks. I think that itself is like reaching out to so many people out there. Is there any more questions from anybody? I think this has been a fantastic evening. Absolutely delightful to hear your journey and also hear some of the comments and questions that everybody asked. It was very insightful from everybody's point of view, asking questions and sharing their perspective about how they felt about the session. I would urge all of you to please go ahead and visit our LinkedIn page and also post these comments that you actually have written. Wonderful comments here. We will also try to capture these and put it out there. And absolutely, you know, go and write comments. I mean, that's when people would know about his journey. And this is a recorded session. We will share it. So people will be able to also, you know, some of them who have missed out probably can, you know, listen to their audio and probably learn and or get inspired to find their own Everest. So before we all say thank you to Kuntal, I would ask all of you to switch on your videos so that we take a picture, a virtual picture. Indula or Lakshmi going to do the thing. So please do switch on your cameras. Some of them are still. And I have to tell you that today's audience turnout has been fantastic. There's like 5 pages of audience for this session, and it's an absolute fantastic turnout. You know, I would love to see the stories that you actually shared. I mean, people's comments on this forum to also be shared on LinkedIn. So are we ready? Lakshmi or Indula, go ahead and smile and say cheese.
What is the next week's program?
Yes, so on 7th, we have Indrapalji in conversation with Mr. Kiran Karnik on the decisive decade. On 9th, we have a link of this. We had yoga for better living. We had this mountaineering expedition to test our capacities and capabilities. And it's all about then Ahar. So we have Ahar Ved by Shri Harish Shetty, a dietitian, who is going to tell us about the dietetics tips. And for that also, we all invite you for these sessions. The session on the decisive decade, and the second one is Ahar Ved. Our WhatsApp groups, you must be receiving all the programs that are lined up in the month of July. Please register yourself. Go to our YouTube channel. Please subscribe YouTube channel, and we will be coming up with all great sessions for all our participants and the students and the well-wishers of the event. Thank you.
Thank you. And you know, we will definitely find us as it's Bombay Management Association on LinkedIn, and this post will be available there. Please go and comment, and you will get your personal link to this or the talk. All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kuntal, for you know, coming here and giving us this wonderful inspirational talk. And thank you to all our current president, Kavita, and past presidents who are present here, and the entire Bombay Management Association's team to support and bring this session to life. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.